Welcome to the Astro podcast. Today we have with us Márton Veszprémy from the Eötvös Loránd University, and he is doing a PhD research on the practices, the astrological practices in 15th century and early 16th century in East Europe, which I find it's very fascinating because it's a subject I really don't know too much about. We were just talking about this in the previous conversation previous to the interview. So welcome to the podcast. And please tell us a little bit about your research and your findings in this field.
Thank you for your invitation, and I am very happy to be here. My research focuses mainly on the reign of the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus, because astrology emerged during his reign here in Hungary, and astrologers had to be imported, so to speak. So they were university trained people from Vienna, like Regiomontanus, and also from Krakow, like Martin Bilica, who was the king's court astrologer for long decades. So geographically, it's Vienna, Krakow, Buda triangle that I'm examining.
Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. And so they were all imported, as you said, and when they began practicing in the Budapest or Vienna or Krakow, did they had any students? Did they begin also teaching local people to practice, or did they keep the trade to themselves?
I have not encountered any piece of evidence that would indicate the teaching of astrology here in Hungary. So all the people we know of came from abroad.
Interesting, because it is because normally they there's some kind of teaching, so there's no evidence of that. Interesting.
So, a university was established in Hungary, in Pozsony, which is nowadays Bratislava, Slovakia, but it was very short-lived, and we don't really have evidence that astrology was taught there.
Okay. This is something that we find also in some universities in our end of Europe, which is there's not always a clear evidence of astrology being taught. We know that they did learn, that they learned it. There are some notice of classes, but there's very little information, and sometimes it's more conjectural what we know about the astrology teaching than having, I don't know, a record of a class or a record of who attended or when it is given it. So I think this is a problem that we find in numerous places, and perhaps not so much in Italy or even England or France, the central of medieval world, the center of medieval world, but I think in what the so-called periphery, sometimes it's difficult to ascertain exactly where and how astrology was taught. So it's curious that you're finding the same thing at your end. And so we're talking about court astrologers and advisors mainly.
I can't hear you especially well. Court astrologers and?
They were
Educated people.
they were essentially court astrologers, so they were not teaching, so they were practicing and they were advisors, really.
Well, Regiomontanus was more of a scientist, more of a researcher. So, as far as we know, he was not an advisor at the court. He came here and he continued to work on his own projects. So, to say, composing table works, but as far as we know, he wasn't an advisor. He did not make horoscopes here in Hungary. Bilica, on the other hand, was I would say more or less official court astrologer, and as far as we know, he was an advisor, and he also held ecclesiastical positions, which allowed him to earn his bread.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And what evidences have you found of their practices? Do they have manuscripts? Do you have documents that you're working on? Is it published books already? What do you have as material for your research?
Yes, there are several works we know that Bilica composed here in Hungary. Some of them are theoretical works, but there are also horoscopes. There is a collection of horoscopes in a Krakow manuscript, including a horoscope of Matthias Corvinus, his wife, and his illegitimate son and intended successor, John Corvinus, and they are clearly the work of Márton Bilica. There is also a horoscope for the coronation of Matthias, and also an elective horoscope for the start of a war campaign. So it seems that he was frequently asked.
Okay, that's
And
very
when you say these horoscopes, do you mean just the horoscopes, or do you also have the reports, the interpretations of the horoscopes?
It's interesting because I would say that in this Krakow manuscript there is either one or the other. So there are horoscope charts with absolutely no interpretation, or just biographical facts. You know, I don't know, someone's birth or death or some life event that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And there are interpretations with absolutely no charts.
So you have one or the other, not the two together. That's strange.
Yeah.
That is very strange.
Yeah, it is. Usually there's always a chart or some calculation with the text, but yeah.
So, but there you have either horoscopes or text. You can have both. Oh, that is interesting. That is interesting.
But, sometimes from the text you can reconstruct the chart, which is
yes, of course.
Yeah. And it's a very diverse collection. So you have nativities, you have elections, coronation events, if the coronation wasn't chosen. So it's quite an interesting thing. And are you going to address all this material? Are you going to interpret it, talk about it? Is that your plan? Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, I have already started it during my MA research.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a continuation of the work which I began there.
Yeah, we took a look at your articles in English, the ones that we can read, of course, and I think they're very good work and very interesting. I liked a lot the one that you did, which is a bit outside of your current work, which is the one on geography and the attributions of geography, which was very interesting article. I must say.
Yes.
Congratulations, because it's a very good summarize of that period. Yeah. And this is something you did on the side as an additional an extra.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I'm rather interested in the whole history of astrology. I obviously can't study all the areas and all the sources, but I read about it enthusiastically. And I recently I also became very interested in the 20th century Hungarian astrology and astrologers, and that is again an offside, so it's not part of my official research plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Still interesting, of course.
For example, here with the Astro project, we are intended to study pre-modern astrology and in a technical perspective, so to see what they did. But here in the podcast, what we've been discussing with various people, it's various aspects of the history of astrology, and we haven't been yet to the 20th century, but it's okay because we want to also provide a more broad view of the history of astrology, which is still ongoing as we speak. So it is also interesting to see how 20th century astrology developed in several countries, because I think so far the work that has been done is focused too much on the English-speaking countries, mainly. French a little bit. We have a bit more from France, but we have very little. We know very little from everyone else. What was
you mean 20th century?
20th century, yes.
Or others also, but yeah.
Yes. In James Herschel Holden's book, you have little bits of information, but it just scraps. It is very interesting. I enjoy it very much, but it's a lot of research is yet to be done on that field.
I think in publications, exchanges, how the practice went, and for example, here in Portugal, we have the same problem. We have absolutely no idea of how astrology was being practiced. I would think from 18th century onwards until mid 20th century, we have very little information, and it hasn't been yet organized, a historical work on what's happening. Of course, because we are working, both of us are working with history of science, our studies of astrology as history of science stop at the 18th century. Only the two first decades of the 18th century we can still manage, but more than that, it goes beyond. But
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but it's still interesting from the point of view of cultural history, how astrology continued throughout these times. And I think even if you're now concentrated on the pre-modern world and in the passage from the medieval to the early modern, I still think it's worthwhile at some point to explore also current history. And that's interesting to know, because at some point a history of astrology of the 19th and 20th century must be done, and one that includes other parts of the world that are not just the English-speaking countries mainly. We were discussing another day, I think it was, I don't recall who of our guests we were talking about this. And for example, Arabic astrology is mainly discussed nowadays in a medieval context, but it continued to be practiced until today.
Was it Africatic?
I don't know if it was Scotic. I don't recall, but this is something, and we don't know. There's very little done in how that continued throughout the ages, and from the 18th century. I know that there are some works done, but not enough, so we can have a full picture. So it is interesting, at least. For example, we will try to develop this somehow in Portugal and see if there's someone interesting to do that kind of research. And it's interesting to know from other parts of Europe also.
And then we can
Yeah.
connect the dots, and we can compare all our studies and all our research, and to get a more complete view of astrology. Well, this is a very ambitious idea that we have, and we need some time. Anyway.
Eventually we'll get there. But going back to your research. So, how do you want to tell us a bit? How did you get involved into the history of astrology to start with?
I became interested very early in astrology because my mother and my grandmother learned astrology from an astrologer in the 1970s or 80s. So the basic handbooks of Hungarian handbooks of astrology were available at home. And my father, on the other hand, is a historian. So for me, the history of astrology is a combination of their interests.
Yeah.
Yes, you just joined the two things. Very interesting. So it's in the family. It's everything in the family.
You managed to merge the two family interests in your work.
That's very interesting. I am curious about still your PhD. Are you going to go into technical aspects of astrology in your PhD, or will you focus more in the social history or cultural history? How are you going about this?
We know actually quite many details already from the lives of these astrologers. Tinner has a very valuable monograph about Regiomontanus. It is still unsurpassed. And Martin Bilica has also been studied. So actually, a Hungarian historian, Benedek Lang, said that the history of astrology here in Hungary is both over-researched and under-researched at the same time. So we know many historical facts, but we haven't really studied these documents in depth. We haven't really read them. We haven't explored. There are short one-page texts or pages or texts of 2 or 3 pages, which are not very well known, and they survive often in one single manuscript. And so many important little details and little facts can be found. And research was mainly done previously by people who did not understand very much the technical side of astrology. So they were very good historians, but they didn't know how to cast a horoscope. And so more remains to be done on the technical side, on the technical part.
It's also similar to Portugal, and some good historians already addressed parts of the topic, but not the technical part. So we also are we are doing something similar here.
Yes. And our research has also provided a lot of information by reading and studying the technical aspects of the manuscripts and the documents we have. So I think you will find a lot of information in them. What do these people knew? What do they practice? What is their influence? what kind of requirements are they called for? What kind of charts? What kind of practices?
What sources do they
What sources do they quote? I think it's a lot. It's a lot of information, and sometimes even very valuable historical information that can be known by an astrological interpretation that has a little bit of information that we were not aware, like someone's exact birth time or birth date, which sometimes we don't know, we just know more or less. So I think you will find, you'll get to the end of your PhD, I'm sure, with a lot of new information by studying the documents. And we believe that's a very worthwhile method of analyzing things.
When do you told us before we start recording, it was you still have a few months or about 1 year, isn't it?
Yes, a year.
It will be 21, so 2021 it will be ready, and then hopefully it will be published so we can also read it.
Are you writing in English?
No, I'm writing in Hungarian. I would like to rework it and restructure it before an English language publication, because I think that a PhD dissertation has other goals than a book, a broader public, and therefore I think it should be restructured slightly.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
But still, we can hope for it in English sometime.
Sometime, yes.
Sometime in the future.
Yeah,
Yes.
that would be wonderful.
That would be good.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Unfortunately, English is the language that we all communicate, and we're doing it right now at this point. Yeah. And these documents, I was curious still on the documents. Are they in Latin? Are they in Hungarian? Or what kind of language do you find them?
Yeah. Latin. There are no documents of medieval astrology in Hungary.
Okay.
In Hungarian language.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's like here, although the document I studied in my PhD was a late 15th century document written in Latin, all of it, except the last part was in French. Mm-hmm. So the last interpretation was in French, what is easier for me, I have to say. But strangely, the last one was in French, Old mm-hmm. French. So sometimes they would kind of mix a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And so do you have any other plans of publication right now, or just working on the PhD at this point?
I have 2 articles that are almost ready. One is about 20th century Hungarian astrologers and the communist secret services. So whether they were so how the secret services reacted to this whole topic, whether they kept a close eye on astrologers.
That is very interesting. Yes, we have no idea about this.
Yes, and the other one is about the dating through astrological data of the work Album Masar in Sadan.
Sadan, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, are they in English, the articles?
Are they? Sorry?
In English.
The second one is in English.
Oh, and the first one it isn't. Oh no! I was very curious about the first one.
I can translate it for you if you're very interested, and I always write long summaries when I publish them.
Okay, like a long abstract. Okay.
That would be perhaps an interesting.
Translated.
Yeah.
They can be translated.
They can be translated.
Yes,
Yes.
but that could perhaps be
I think
an
that would be
interesting
very
topic
interesting.
for once you're finished with it and it's published. It would be an interesting topic to discuss what you found out, because that's a very interesting topic.
Yes, maybe we can schedule another podcast when you have the article ready.
Yeah,
The one about the
Secret
astrologers
Service.
that would be fascinating to
Yes,
discuss.
yes.
Do you know when it will be published?
Yes. I think early 2022. So it's slightly more than a year. And actually, I have in the official state archives, I have found much less information about this whole secret services stuff than I was hoping for. So I am still collecting information and material, and researching 20th century Hungarian astrology is not very easy, because all the documents are in private hands at families, and you have to trace them, you have to ask them to share those with you, and it's not always easy.
Yes, people are not always willing to cooperate. Sometimes we have the same here. Some documents, not directly, but we know of historians who wanted to see some documents that are in private families or private collections, and it's not always easy to gain access to them. So yes, so well, good luck, because I hope you get as much as possible, because I think that topic is really interesting, and honestly, I think it should be also translated into English.
At some point, yeah.
I'm sure people will be extremely curious about this.
Yes.
Extremely curious.
Yes. Okay. So let us know whenever you publish something interesting,
because we'll be.
It's always interesting to discuss. We have been doing, so as you've seen probably in the podcast, several conversations with many astrologers, some at the beginning of their research like ourselves and you, others people who already have a long career and have been major players in this field and major inspiration sources for all of us. But we're always eager to discuss, these little bits of research, because we would like that the podcast and also the Astro project could be a place where we at least know what everyone else is doing, so that we always have the news and who's doing what and what's happening and what's being published. So whenever you have your research done, being your PhD, of course, because that's going to be your central focus from now on. You have 1 year. It's very fast until it ends. It's now on the run. I'm much less than a year from finishing mine, and I know the pressure. But please, or any article or publication that you do, we would love to discuss it. And that one is the Secret Service. Yes. We would like to talk a bit.
We will keep it in mind, because we are very, very curious about this. And another question: are there many other people in your country studying astrology from the technical point of view, or are you the only one or one of the few that studies?
Not the only one, but I would say one of the few. There is a younger generation of researchers that is emerging now. In Hungary, I would say there are 3 or 4 people who understand the technical side and who are really interested in this kind of research. They are mostly younger researchers, I would say in their 30s or 40s. So
okay, that is interesting, because here we were practically alone, and now there are some people that are beginning.
Now people are starting to gain some interesting. And again, nowadays we're starting to see the appearance of a scholar which has enough technical information and technical knowledge to decipher the manuscripts and the material, because most people so far, few people, I don't know, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, had the ability to go into the astrology and really understand what's going on. Perhaps a few of them were on the history of mathematics because they were studying the calculations, so they had an idea of how it worked. But from the interpretative point of view, I think now in the last 20 to 30 years, or less, a lot of people have been appearing that have the technical knowledge to really look at the documents and see what's happening, such as yourself. So yeah,
globally there is very clearly a surge of interest in the history of astrology, which is very good and very fortunate.
Yes, it is.
Yes, and I always say this. I think astrology is already studied from the cultural and let's say political point of view. We have very good historians who addressed astrology from this perspective. What we need now is people who study astrology from the inside, from the technical point of view. That's what you're doing, and that's what we're also doing. So it's another way of looking into astrology. Because before we had people, well, we had a few, of course. We always had one or two historians who could actually take a look and understand what has been done technically. But most historians would address the political consequences or the religious interaction from astrology and religion, or the social impact of astrology. And that's very good. I really admire those works, but I want to do another, I want to add, such as you, another perspective, which is the so-called technical perspective. So this is interesting.
Yes, and we have 3 millennia, perhaps, at least, to study, material to study and to deal with. Okay.
So just let me ask you a very technical question. I don't know if you can answer at this point, but you mentioned Regiomontanus, of course, and what we have, he calculated the horoscope of one of our queens, the empress, the princess who married Emperor Frederick II and became empress. But when he calculated Portugal, yes, Eleanor of Portugal, the horoscope, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be wrong, but the horoscope is calculated in the so-called Alcabitius system, because the Regiomontanus system was implemented later.
Or it became popular.
Popular later. So Regiomontanus himself, or his master, they calculated the empress horoscope in so-called Alcabitius. So when you see these horoscopes, are some of them by Regiomontanus? And if so, what is the house system that he uses? I don't know if you addressed this already, or if you.
I haven't caught your last sentence. Could you repeat it?
Oh, yes. Sorry. If you have in your collection of horoscopes, some horoscopes calculated by Regiomontanus, what house system is he using? I don't know if you looked into this already.
Yes. The Krakow manuscript that I have examined is by Marcin Bilica. So it's not by Regiomontanus. There are very few horoscopes actually calculated by Regiomontanus, and if I think his authorship of the horoscope of Eleanor of Portugal is not 100%. So we're not entirely sure whether he has done it. If I remember correctly, he also used the Alcabitius house system in the horoscope of the Emperor Maximilian. the future Emperor Maximilian.
Yes, yes.
And which is 100% by him. So it is beyond doubt. He was only acquainted with this house system, with the so-called Regiomontanus house system later. I have examined his ephemerides in Vienna, and in those ephemerides you can find the horoscopes of the new and full moons. And until some point there are horoscopes calculated with the Alcabitius house system. At a point they just cease to appear, and there are absolutely no horoscopes from that point. So I have speculated that perhaps, and it is only a speculation, around that time Regiomontanus may have discovered this new house system. So perhaps that's why the horoscopes of the new and full moons no longer appear after that date. We don't know exactly when he changed from the Alcabitius to the so-called Regiomontanus system, because there are very few horoscope charts cast by him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, that has always been a question, and I think one thing that has come up in several instances and in many time periods is that usually the proponents of a new house system rarely use it. One example that I always recall is that of Al-Biruni, because Al-Biruni has been found out that he is, at least he claims to be, the creator of what we call today the Campanos house system. You probably read about this already. And I think in his own nativity, he still uses the Alcabitius, or the standard system, for calculating his own nativity, after proclaiming that his method was the best and the most correct. So there's always this discrepancy of what exactly is a theory and then what do they do in practice. That's why we always ask this to people that are doing the research on horoscopes, because it's interesting to see exactly if what we see theorized in an astrological manual is then applied into practice or not, even in something so simple as a calculation. So it's intriguing that some of the horoscopes he does are still on the Alcabitius or standard system quite late. So it's very interesting. I think the house systems is something that at some point has to be really thoroughly, not exactly where it comes from or how it's calculated. I think that's more or less clear so far how it works, but how they are exactly applied, because there's a lot of discussion on that, and I think we need really historical evidences of when, how they are applied, by whom. So it's interesting.
Well, ideas for future research.
Ideas for research and for of course for cooperation, because if all of us feed into
with our examples,
examples, each one with its work and find evidence, perhaps we can start creating a larger picture of this puzzle of information.
Speaking of the mysteries of history, and since you are acquainted with the horoscope of Eleanor, the Empress Eleanor, one interesting detail, I can send you I can translate it for you. Her father, our King Duarte, he wrote down all the days and times of birth of his children. So we had them. Problem. When he writes Eleanor's birth date and time, it's different from the one that Regiomontanus used. No idea why. I can translate.
The mysteries of history.
This is mysteries of history. So I can translate this bit and send it to you. because I think you will find it interesting.
Yes, that's actually very interesting, because it has been thought, or it has been speculated, that the horoscope of Eleonora was cast at the occasion of her marriage, and that information must have come from the family. So that's that's what that's what was thought previously.
Yeah, he has this little text because her father, King Duarte, he liked to write things. He would collect information, and he has this little piece of paper called Remembrance or something like that. Remembrance of my children, or something like that. Something about the birth dates and times of his children. And Eleonora has a different date.
Yes.
Even a different day, not just a different. It's like 2 days, 2 days after or 2 days before. So it would be completely different.
That's very interesting.
It's very strange. But I will translate this bit to you, and I will send it to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because that might help.
That might even translate into a paper, cooperative paper or something. That would be interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Okay.
So.
Well, we don't want to keep too long. And I thank you very much for accepting our invitation and to share with us a little bit about your research and your research interests. And Márton, we hope to have you in the future in more sessions so we can discuss the specific aspects of your research and your findings. That would be, I think, very interesting.
Yes, and we will keep in contact.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure talking to you, and we will see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.